Okay, back again. All right, so I wanted to talk to you a little bit about solving equations because there is some unique situations that you come up to. A couple of times during this, you're going to see a point where you end up the variable cancels out, right? The variable cancels out or just goes away, right? And you end up getting a number is equal to a number. Now, there's two possible cases for this. Now, the first case is the numbers are the same. Okay? When the numbers are the same, that means that there are infinite solutions. And a lot of times they'll say that's the identity and that the solution is all real numbers. Okay? These all mean, in essence, the same thing. Okay? Now, the other time is when the numbers are different. And when we do that, that means there is no solution. That means there's no number that I could put in on both sides of that equation and make it work out. So, as we go into these problems from here, I want you guys to go ahead and make sure you're aware of that. So those are the possible solutions when the variable goes away and you have a number is equal to another number. Okay, so let's go ahead and start working on. We left off on number 37 here. Now this, again, we're going to still follow the don't call me after midnight. So we see D is distribute. So we see parentheses here. So we're going to distribute on both sides of the equation. I want to caution you to make sure that you distribute to everything in the parentheses. So here I get negative 6W, and this turns into 24 plus 8W is equal to 2W plus 18. So C is combine like terms. So I'm going to combine these like terms, right? So negative 6W plus 8W is 2W. Now I cannot combine 6W with 24 because they are not like terms, right? So I get 2W plus 24 is equal to 2W plus 18. Now that's where we can see a problem here, right? So this is not possible, but the way that I would do this is, okay, let's bring the variable over to one side. Okay, what happens is we end up with an equation that says 24 is equal to 18. Well, that's just not possible, so that would be no solution. Okay, now here, let's go ahead and try this one. Again, we have to distribute twice, so I'm going to distribute on this side. Now, do you see this negative on the outside? I want you to imagine that as a negative 1, and you're going to distribute into here. So you just change everything to its opposite here. And then I'm going to distribute the 2 into this side. So I get 3m, right? And I get minus 7m minus 12 is equal to 2 times m, which is 2m. 2 times negative 3 is minus 6. Okay? So 3m minus 7m gives me a negative 4m minus 12 is equal to 2m minus 6. Now again, I'm just going to do what I'm used to doing and bring the variable to one side. I have to be very careful with my signs, so please do not be afraid to use a calculator. So I have negative 4m minus 2m. That gives me a negative 6m minus 12 is equal to negative 6. And then I'm going to get this 12 over to the other side. Since that's the minus, and opposite of subtracting is addition, so I'm going to add 12 to both sides of the equation. So I get negative 6m is equal to 6. And then I divide each side of the equation by the number in front of m. So don't forget about that negative sign. I can't end up with a negative variable, so be very careful with that. So now I get m is equal to negative 1. Okay? All right, so far so good. All right, so let's move on to some more problems. Now here's some more that are more complicated and kind of want to take you through every type of equation that you can get. The biggest thing is that I can tell you is to please slow down, write down every step. Don't skip steps. It's very, very bad to do that, especially when you're just learning. As you get further on in math, you could probably skip here and there, but when you're doing things for tests and quizzes, just take your time. You have plenty of time to do them. So, okay. So, following don't call me after midnight. So, a lot of times I do this DCAM. So, D is distribute. I have parentheses right here. I'm going to distribute, and I'm going to multiply by -2. So, 2x minus 8x, and then this becomes plus 6, is equal to 6 minus 6x. All right? So then this becomes -6x plus 6 is equal to 6 minus 6x. Now, if you look right here, you should be able to tell that these are exactly the same thing, but let me show you. If I bring the 6x to the other side of the equation, I end up with 6 is equal to 6. Okay, so my variable went away, but my numbers are exactly the same. So that means that's the identity, which means they're infinite solutions. Okay, or I can just do all real numbers. All right, which means I can plug in any number for x, and this will be a true statement. Now, when we have proportions like this, it's kind of tricky, but what we're going to do is cross multiply. I'm going to multiply this times this, so 7 times x, so 7 times x, and 3 times this difference of x minus 8. So when I do that, I have to be careful to put parentheses around that expression, because if I don't, I'm not going to remember to distribute. So, again, I need to distribute. So I have 7x is equal to 3x minus 24. And I'm going to bring the variable to one side. And I get 4x is equal to -24. And I divide each side of the equation by the number in front of x, which is 4. So x is equal to -6. All right. Okay, again, these are just some practice. If you need additional practice, please go on to iExcel and practice them, or find some other if you have a teacher, or you can also contact me as well. Now, literal equations are always something that kind of throws people for a loop, but you actually do them all the time. You just don't realize you're doing them. So, and what you have to do is kind of look at this as if you're solving for this variable, but you're treating everything else like you normally would anyways. Okay, so here I'm solving for h. So this is the letter that I have to get back by itself. Now, whenever I have a fraction, the first thing I want to do, so it's on this side, I want to simplify this side as much as possible. So to get rid of this fraction, I'm going to multiply by a number to get rid of this 1/2. And in order to do that, I'm just going to multiply by 2. Okay? So that gets rid of the fraction on both sides. So what happens is I get 2a is equal to b times h. All right. Now, this is very, very important. I write this out. 2 times a is equal to b times h. So if I'm trying to do b times h, b and h are being multiplied, how do I undo multiplication? I undo multiplication by division. So I want to get h by itself, so I'm going to divide by the number or letter next to h. So I divide by b, and I get h is now equal to 2a divided by b. All right? Now what do I do? Here, okay? So I'm solving for b. So I always want to remember that I'm what I'm solving for. So I want to get rid of this. Everything's being divided by 4. So how do I undo divide by 4? Well, what's the opposite of division? it's multiplication. So I'm going to multiply both sides of the equation by 4, and I get 4c is equal to a squared plus 3b. And again, I'm solving for the b. I have to get rid of this a squared. I don't have to do anything with the squared part. I just have to get rid of it. So I'm going to take away a squared from each side because a squared is positive. So I have 4c minus a squared is equal to 3 times b. If this were 3b is equal to 12, how would I solve for b? I would solve by dividing by 3, right? So I'm going to divide both sides of the equation by 3. So b is equal to 4c minus a squared divided by 3. Okay? So that finishes that up. Let's go ahead and go to graphing inequalities. Now, when we graph inequalities, everything is the same as when we graph regular equations, but let's talk about those a little bit. Solving inequalities. So when we solve inequalities, the only thing that's different is if we divide or multiply by a negative number, I am going to flip the sign. Okay? After that, also remember some of our cues for when we graph inequalities. If we're doing a greater than, I always try to bring my variable on the left side. So bring the variable to the left side. And if the variable's on the left and it's isolated, this always stays the same. So I want to make sure you understand that. So we've got greater than, less than, we have greater than or equal to, or less than or equal to. So greater than is an open circle because it doesn't include the number that we're talking about, and it goes in this direction. And if you notice, this kind of points in the direction that it's supposed to be going. And that's another reason why I like to bring the variable to the left. Okay? If it's less than, you have an open circle again, but you go to the left of the number that you isolate. Okay. As you can imagine, greater than or equal to includes the number, so we have a solid circle, and it goes to the right of the number that we isolated. And then we have a solid circle going to the left for less than or equal to. Okay, again, always bring your variable to the left side, otherwise these are all in reverse. Okay, and I think it's easier because these are pointing in the direction that we want to graph. Okay, so we're going to graph inequalities later, and that's going to help you a lot too, so I want to make sure you keep in mind about that. All right, so let's go to this one right here. So I'm going to go through these 4, and then I'll pause again, and we'll do some more because we're doing ands and ors. Even though it's not really part of the curriculum, we're just going to kind of build on it because it is something you're going to need to know in later math. So the first thing I'm going to do is, just like I would any other equation, I'm solving for x, so I'm going to subtract 13. Now, an inequality means its number is not equal to that, it's all the numbers less than that, and so or greater than or equal to, and it's impossible to list all those numbers, so that's why we use an inequality symbol, because there's infinitely numbers, right? So here, I have 11x is greater than or equal to negative 33. Now, because I'm not dividing by a negative number, I do not switch the sign. So I'm going to divide by 11. So x is greater than or equal to negative 3. So I go find negative 3, which is right here, and I do a solid circle because it has that equal sign on the right there, and I'm going in this direction, so I go this way. Now when I graph off of the line so it's easier to see, so just don't be alarmed when you see that. Okay, moving on to the other one, I'm going to again just bring my variable to the left side. I see this negative, and that gives me a clue that I'm probably going to have to flip my sign. So I try to remember that when I see that as I'm doing that. So I'm going to bring my variable to one side. So I'm going to subtract this 3x right here. So I have negative 5x plus 6 is greater than negative 34, right? And then I want to get rid of everything around x. So I'm going to subtract 6 on each side. And I get negative 5x is now greater than negative 40. And I divide by negative 5. Now this is a big hint to myself that I need to flip my sign. So x is now less than the number 8. Not because this changes signs, so that tells me this has to change. So I find 8. I have an open circle on 8 because I don't include it, and I'm going to the left. You see how it's pointing to the left? See how easy that is? Because it's pointing in the direction that I needed to go. And there we go. All right? Now let's move to these next two right here. I'm going to distribute, and I'm going to distribute this negative 7. All right, so be very careful. So I have 3x minus 7x minus 21 is greater than or equal to negative 13. So then I combine like terms. So 3x minus 7x is negative 4x minus 21, which is greater than or equal to negative 13. And then I add 21 to each side, and I get negative 4x is greater than or equal to negative 13 plus 21. So that's, I think it's 8. Yep, that's a positive 8. Okay, and then I divide by negative 4. Once again, being very, very aware that I have to flip my sign. So now x is now less than or equal to a negative 2. Since this changed signs, so does this, right? So I find negative 2. It's a solid circle, and I'm going to the left. So I go here. All right, and then the last ones here, we're going to go ahead and distribute these. 4 minus 8x is less than 10 minus 6x. All right, I want to bring the variable to one side as quickly as possible. So I'm going to add 6x. Remember, if you're switching from side to side, you're going to use your opposite operation. So I have 4 minus 2x. Okay, that tells me there's a negative number in front of x, so that's probably going to mean I have to switch my signs. And I subtract 4 from each side. And I have negative 2x is less than 6. And I divide by a negative 2. Because I'm dividing by a negative, I have to flip my sign. So x is now greater than negative 3. All right, so we have an open circle on negative 3, and we're going to the right. All right, special thanks to Gina Wilson. All Things Algebra gives me awesome problems to work from. Highly recommend teachers buying this for geometry, algebra, algebra 2. So thanks again, guys. Have a good night, and if you need anything else, please just email me.